Hello and welcome to the Atlas Agency, a channel all about Arkham Horror the card game by Fantasy Flight Games. I'm your host Brandon, and I'm taking a look today at the new player cards introduced in Arkham's first upgrade expansion, Return to the Night of the Zealot. Return to the Night of the Zealot comes with 10 new player cards, with 2 copies of each card. There are 2 new cards per class and no neutral cards. In keeping with the theme of the product, all 10 of the new cards here are upgraded versions of cards that originally appeared in the game's core set, or in one case, a lower level version of a core set card. And they're all in the level 2 to level 3 range, with nothing at levels 1, 4, or 5. Before I start talking through the individual cards, I want to first answer what I think may be a common question about this product, and that's, does Return to the Night of the Zealot reduce the need to purchase a second core set? And the answer to that question is a pretty strong no. There are no level 0 cards in this box, only cards at levels 2 and 3, which means it doesn't give you any new cards that can go into a starting deck list. So you're not getting anything here that's going to help you increase the consistency of one of those starting decks. What this expansion does give you is a handful of cards that you can bring into your deck in the middle of a campaign by spending your hard-earned experience points. This also won't expand your max player count and allow you to field 4 investigators like a second core set would. If you have just a core set in this expansion, you'll still only be able to build legal decks for 2 investigators at a time. If you're really averse to buying a second core set, just know that buying any deluxe expansion, like for example the Dunwich Legacy, is going to increase your deck building options by a lot more than Return to the Night of the Zealot would. Even most of the Mythos Pack expansions, with just a few exceptions, are going to give you more to work with in terms of expanding your deck building pool. Though do keep in mind, to play the scenario found in any Mythos Pack, you're going to need the corresponding deluxe box from that cycle. Bottom line, don't let the fact that this expansion is related to the core set campaign trick you into thinking this somehow substitutes for picking up a second core set. It actually does less for you in that regard than most of the normal expansions for the game, and if you're just starting out in the game, I would definitely recommend prioritizing at least one deluxe box and the associated Mythos packs over getting Return to the Night of the Zealot. So with all that said, let's move on now to talking about the individual player cards. As I said earlier, there are 10 new cards in this box, with 2 copies of each. The first 5 cards we're going to look at are all part of the same suite of cards. The core set came with 5 talent assets, 1 per class, that allow you to pay resources to pump 2 specific skills during skill tests. I'm talking about Hard Knocks, Physical Training, Arcane Studies, Hyper Awareness, and Dig Deep. Return to the Night of the Zealot gives us upgraded level 2 versions of all 5 of these cards. All 5 of the upgraded versions follow the same pattern, so let's look at the new and old versions of Physical Training just to show what that pattern is. There are 2 changes that the upgrade brings. First, the resource cost to play the asset has now dropped from 2 to 0. And second, the number of skill icons you can get by committing the card instead of playing it has doubled. For Physical Training, that's 2 willpower icons or 2 combat icons, whereas before it was 1 of each. Each asset, of course, does a unique pair of skills. As you can see, the card text is the same. It still lets you spend 1 resource for +1 to either willpower or combat. So, same changes for all 5 of these new cards, they just have different skill pairings on them. So I think I'm happy with this set of cards. They're not groundbreaking. My head is not swimming with new possibilities here, but I think they do add enough value that a decent number of investigators will get use out of them. The double skill icons also mean that there's some combo potential here with any card that counts skill icons. Right now, that's basically the Yodel ally from Forgotten Age, and the new Guardian asset Well Prepared from Boundary Beyond, so not a large pool, but probably likely to grow in the future. With one of these in play, that's 2 different stats that Well Prepared would be able to boost by 2, so decks that use those cards have some extra incentive to pick these upgrades up. With 5 of these talents, that's half the player card space in Return to the Night of the Zealot right there. Each class gets just 1 other card, so let's move on to those. Guardians get a level 2 version of the Dynamite Blast event. This version is slightly cheaper than the original. It costs 4 resources instead of 5, and it also picks up a combat icon. Like the original version, this has you choose either your location or a connecting location, and it deals 3 damage to each enemy and each investigator at that location. But the upgraded version adds a new sentence at the end. This action does not provoke attacks of opportunity. I suspect some people are going to see this and possibly realize for the first time that they've been forgetting to take the attack of opportunity whenever they dropped a level 0 Dynamite Blast while they were engaged with enemies. I think that's easy to miss or forget because Dynamite Blast feels sort of like an attack, even though rules-wise it's not one. So with a 3 damage from the Dynamite Blast, plus damage and/or horror from the attack of opportunity, maybe even multiple attacks if you've got multiple enemies, bombing your own location can be a pretty desperate play, so this cuts that risk down to just taking the 3 damage. Still not pleasant, but not as awful. I'm not especially excited by this card. I guess if you have spare experience and there's nothing else you want, then it's something, but at this point Guardians have quite a bit of good stuff to buy, and I think this would end up being fairly low priority. I guess if you expect to be swarmed by enemies and you're planning in advance that you want to have Dynamite Blast as an option for dealing with that situation, then that could be a valid reason to take this. I could at least see that specifically for the Night of the Zealot campaign, so that makes this card kind of relevant to the product that it's appearing in. In general, though, I don't expect this to see much play on my table. I don't even always use the level 0 Dynamite Blast. These days I sometimes run one copy of it, but I often don't take it at all. Usually if I run it, it's because I'm expecting that particular investigator to have spare resources lying around. Let's roll over to the Seeker class. They get a level 3 upgrade to the Barricade event. This upgrade doesn't change the icons or the resource cost of the card. What it does is it closes a loophole that disrupted the original version of the card. The original version had you attach it to your location, and then non-elite enemies could not move into that location, but it didn't do anything to prevent new enemies from spawning there. So they couldn't wander in through Hunter, but you could draw one and then have it pop up in the room with you. The level 3 version fixes that. It now says non-elite enemies cannot move into or spawn at the attached location. Each time an enemy would spawn at the attached location, spawn it at a connecting location instead, if able. So that makes it a little better at its intended purpose, keeps you safely sealed away from enemies. There's a Mintifan deck that I have yet to try that basically looks to hole up in a location using Barricade, and then use cards like In the Know, Seeking Answers, and Deciphered Reality to gather clues remotely while you're safely hidden away where enemies can't bother you. You can also support other investigators remotely from your hidey hole using Min's signature asset that lets you contribute cards to skill tests at other locations. This card is a gift to that deck. You no longer have to worry about enemies spawning there in the closet with you, but if you're not building around Barricade like that, I think the card is mostly pretty limited. Most Seekers need to keep moving in order to gather clues effectively, and generally they're not going to want to spend too much time in the same spot. So in the right deck, this has the potential to be useful. In general, though, I think most Seekers will pass on this, especially at 3 experience. Mystics get an upgrade to Mind Wipe, which originally appeared in the core set as a level 1 event. This new version is level 3. It keeps the same resource cost and icons as the original. The original version lets you treat a non-elite enemy's printed text box as if it were blank until the end of a phase. Level 3 Mind Wipe still does that, plus it also reduces the chosen enemy's damage and horror values by 1. I don't find this card to be all that impressive. The level 1 version of Mind Wipe for the most part is not a very popular card outside of a few odd scenario-specific applications. Those situations where it's useful don't seem to come up very often. Usually that non-elite requirement keeps you from getting away with anything too crazy. I don't think the damage and horror reduction that this adds is likely to be worth the extra 2 experience points. I guess if you're not planning to deal with an enemy, by reducing the damage and horror, you might be able to nullify a turn's worth of attacks of opportunity, so you could effectively ignore the enemy and go about other business. But that doesn't seem like it would be a common situation. I think if you're blanking a text box, it's more likely you're about to deal with the enemy, not ignore it, and perhaps you're doing something like switching off its retaliate keyword or some other obnoxious ability. So right now, I'm just not seeing the appeal with this. There's one thing I did want to mention about Mind Wipe, though now that Forgotten Age is out. Not really specific to this level 3 version, I just want to point out that Mind Wipe can be used as a tool to help deal with the Forgotten Age's Vengeance enemies. If you blank a Vengeance enemy's text box, then it's just discarded normally when you defeat it, and it won't go to the victory display, so you avoid those nasty Vengeance points. If you're using Mind Wipe that way, then that means you plan to kill the enemy that phase, so the level 1 version should be all you need there. The level 3 version's damage and horror reduction shouldn't really matter. Survivors get one of the more interesting upgrades in this box, a level 3 version of Rabbit's Foot. What this upgrade does is basically introduce some card selection into the card's draw effect, or maybe filtering is the right word for it. So the original card can be exhausted after you fail a skill test to draw 1 card. With a level 3 version, instead of a normal draw, you now get to look at the top X cards from your deck, where X is the amount that you failed the skill test by. You choose one of those cards to draw, and then you shuffle the rest back into your deck, so as long as you fail by at least 2, you get to choose from more than one card. I've said before that draw effects like the one on the level 0 Rabbit's Foot or on Lucky Cigarette Case don't normally excite me very much, even when they're good cards. The card filtering thing, though, puts enough of a twist on this one that I do find it somewhat interesting. It's maybe even one of the highlights of this set for me. Not just interesting, but I think it's actually likely to be quite a good card as well. Out of all the cards in this box, this one feels, I guess, the splashiest, and maybe that's partly because the Survivor class doesn't get level 4 or level 5 cards, so at level 3 this is sitting at the top end of their experience scale, whereas level 2 or 3 for everybody else is a mid-level card. Last but definitely not least, we get a new version of the Rogue event Hot Streak. A lot of events in this box, I guess. This is the one card in this expansion that's actually a downgrade from the core set version. The original Hot Streak was level 4, and here we have a level 2 option. Like the original, this Hot Streak gains you 10 resources, but now you have to input 5 resources instead of just 3, so you're getting a net gain now of 5 instead of 7. Also, the level 4 version had 1 wild icon, and this version drops that down to 1 willpower icon. While it's not very flashy, I think the net gain of 5 is still a worthwhile return, and I suspect this is actually one of the more useful cards out of this whole box. This is a little middle step you can take on your way up to the full level 4 Hot Streak, which is a convenient thing to have. It gives you some flexibility when you spend your experience if you don't end up with enough experience for the full level 4 version, or if you do have 4 to spend but you'd rather get 2 copies of the card in your deck instead of just 1, so you have a better shot at seeing it, even if it's a lower level version, then this is here for you. Also, being level 2 means it's open to some half-rogue investigators like Wendy and Leo, or even Lola, who are barred from taking the full level 4 version. It's also a nice early buy for Safina to copy with the Painted World. Little bonus trivia on Hot Streak. The artwork for this card is recycled from the card Clover Club Ringer from the earlier Call of Cthulhu LCG. That by itself is probably not worth mentioning, as there's quite a bit of sharing of artwork assets between Fantasy Flight's different Arkham Files games, but Hot Streak takes it a little further and also borrows that card's flavor text, word for word. I win again? Sorry, sugar, it's just not your night. So it looks like this woman has maybe been playing this shark routine for a good long while. And with that, we've covered the player cards in Return to the Night of the Zealot. Overall, I would rate the player card side of this expansion as fair at best. There are some useful cards here, but it's mostly stuff on the practical side, and there's nothing that's especially exciting. To use the player archetypes laid out in last month's designer journal over at FFG's site, I think this is an expansion that's geared at the detective. Players who value efficiency and problem solving over flashiness. If you're a storyteller type player who values immersion, I don't think you'll find this expansion as exciting. Since these are all upgrades, there's not much new flavor in any of these cards. There's also not a whole lot here to appeal to the ritualist type player who likes to look for combos and synergies and build weird decks. Maybe Barricade for that, but generally expansions have a little something for everyone, and I think that's less so the case with this expansion. I hope you've enjoyed this look. As always, thanks for watching the Atlas Agency, and good luck in your own investigations of the mythos.